take out all the profanity, right?
We might edit. We usually edit in profanity.
Of those.
Yeah, we usually have a little. Yeah, every time you say timpani, we insert effing timpani.
Now I'm wondering who's been like the most profane guest we've had on. I don't think anyone's really gone for it.
Oh no,
I
no
haven't
one's
had
been.
any since I've been on.
No one's been too bad. We'll fix that this week.
Everyone's pretty well behaved, and it is Sunday, and it's, I'm sure you're all experiencing the same thing with it being the end of the semester. And our last day of class was Saturday. My daughter Catherine graduated from IU recently, and so we've had graduation, et cetera, and so I'm actually at a point where I don't think I have the extra energy to say anything that would be considered profane.
Well, congratulations. That's great. What did she finish in?
Yeah, no, my daughter Catherine well, she'll graduate in July, but she went through some of the school ceremonies, which were really nice, and she's an animal behavior major, and she's doing some really interesting work in terms of charting animals where they're migrating, and she's been to Africa and Costa Rica, and she's heading out for something in the next couple weeks in Utah. So it's very exciting. It's work I know nothing about, and I've been to some of her presentations and lectures. I have no idea what she's saying. I don't understand a word of it. And then all the questions that come, I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, I hope she knows." Oh, I guess she knows the answer, but it's completely out of my area. But it's pretty cool.
Where in Utah? Where will she go? I'm from Utah, so
that's a really good question. It's that's the question that's going to stump me about my own daughter today. I better not say because I'll be incorrect.
That's okay.
But that's where she's heading, and it's kind of one of these things where you're just out in the field and you have to be pretty self-sufficient. And she's loved camping, so it's right up her alley, and I think she's going to have a great time.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny. I came back to my office today, and it's pretty dead here, and like everyone's kind of gone. They've all got packed up, and they're all, so it's always kind of a weird time of year.
Ghost town, ghost school. Carly, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Today is May 5th, 2019, and this is episode 180 of At Percussion. I'm Carly Vigna, and with me today are co-host Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
And Casey Cangelosi.
Hey, everyone. Carly, this is already my favorite episode by far, because after 180 episodes, I'm sitting as a co-host, and you're the brand new co-host, and you're already hosting, so this is already amazing.
Glad I could help you have an easier time. So this is a very special episode for me for two reasons. The first is that it is my 10th episode since I was on as a guest back in December and then started as a co-host, joined the team. So I'm excited. For some of you guys, it's episode 180, and for me, it's episode number 10. And the second reason, really big reason that it's really special today is that we have a very special guest, my former teacher from the University of Maryland, Mr. John Tafoya. John Tafoya is the chairman of the percussion department at Indiana University and served as principal timpanist of the National Symphony Orchestra from 1999 to 2007. He has held previous principal timpani positions with the American Wind Symphony, the National Repertory Orchestra, the Owensboro Symphony, and the Evansville Philharmonic and the Florida Philharmonic Orchestra. He is an active educator. Mr. Tafoya has presented numerous masterclasses and clinics at universities across the United States, including his recent 2018 PASIC clinic, Orchestral Timpani Hacks, that I was really happy to see this past November. His well-circulated books, The Working Timpanist Survival Guide and Beyond the Audition Screen, are staples in percussion music libraries of percussionists all over the U.S. and I'm sure the world. So Mr. Tafoya, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on, Carly. That's like we were just talking. It just seems like yesterday we were both at University of Maryland, and oh my gosh, time moves so fast. And Casey and Ben, thank you so much for having me. 180 episodes. That's pretty cool.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's been a lot of recording for these guys. I'm happy to be on the team. I think, Ben, you've got a question to start us off.
Yeah, well, I just had a question. It's always interesting to me talking to a timpani specialist because it seems like marimba specialists are sort of a dime a dozen. But I was just wondering, do you have any favorite pieces that maybe are less well known that are sort of timpani features? The one that comes to mind for me that I think is totally underrated is the Russell Peck Timpani Concerto.
Yeah,
chamber concerto.
Yeah. No, I actually played harmonic rhythm, which is Russell's timpani concerto, with a couple of orchestras a while back. And you're right. And I think there are certain sections of that concerto that are really interesting. And I told Russell at the time, I said, "Oh my God, that middle movement is so cool with the sounds, and you should make it twice as long." And Russell at that time didn't seem to be really into some of my suggestions. So, but a very interesting piece for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my first job was at the University of Evansville, and at that time I had to do a faculty recital every year. So the first couple years, you can kind of rehash some pieces you may have done in college, what have you. But then I got to a point where I was kind of running out of material. And so I quickly got into checking out or, talking with a lot of people. This was before the internet, so it was a little more difficult to, crowdsource. But there are some really interesting timpani pieces that are out there. In terms of actual concertos, the Sarmientos concertino is one of my favorite pieces to actually play. The outer movements have a piano accompaniment. It's obviously originally for orchestra and soloist. It was premiered by Fred Begun, and that's kind of an interesting story behind that piece because Fred was my predecessor with National, and he actually premiered the Sarmientos. And so it was really cool. He showed me photos of the performance. He actually shared with me the original manuscript. And so at some point when Malatek was, I believe they got the rights to publish or republish that concerto. It was really great. They contacted me, and we were able to kind of come up with a list of just differences between the original manuscript and the first publishing and then the second publishing, which now exists. The second movement is interesting because it's percussion accompaniment only, but you could certainly do it in a recital that way. So that's kind of a neat piece to play. I also like the Oliverio, which is obviously a crazy, the first concerto, the Olympian, and the first movement is almost 8 minutes in length. And so as a recital piece, you could almost simply just do the first movement. It has, electronic accompaniment that you can play to. So I enjoy playing that occasionally. There's also a cool piece, and now my students are probably not going to appreciate me letting it out of the bag, but a lot of my students over the last handful of years have been going through a piece by Graham Wedham called Suite for Timpani. It's a suite of 5 or 6 movements. If you were to play the whole piece, it would be at least 20, 25 minutes long. So it's kind of a neat piece. You can kind of select the movements you want to play. But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, none of us get in the car and turn on the radio and hear timpani solos being played. And certainly there are a lot of pieces that are out there that, I don't know, maybe you just wouldn't enjoy playing, but there certainly are a handful of really great works that are out there, and hopefully more to come, especially, I'll get asked to play with a college ensemble, and I wish there were even more pieces to select from in that or with that kind of arrangement. But it'll continue to grow, just like marimba repertoire obviously has exploded. Hopefully the same thing will happen for us timpani players.
One of my favorite stories is many years ago at PASIC, Bill Murch said he was sitting next to John Haas, and I think it was Alan Oddie was doing a clinic, and Alan Oddie got on the soapbox about how dumb solo marimba was and how it's the most pointless thing, and John Haas is kind of giving the elbow. And then Alan Oddie follows that up with, well, of course, the only thing dumber than solo marimba is solo timpani.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, that's, and I remember actually when I was, getting back to Russell Peck's piece, and we were talking about what the juggling act is for an instrument that, yes, generally timpani are in the back of the ensemble. And so when it's up front and you're featuring it, how do you juggle the balance between what the instrument normally does, what it can do? And so I think that's always an interesting thing to look at when you're looking at these concertos. At what point does it have to carry the whole piece the entire time? Probably not. I hope not. When does it become? When does the writing for the instrument become accompanimental, and when does it feature? When do you feature some of these other things and these other traits that the instruments can exhibit? That's where I think it gets interesting.
Yeah, I had a few others I wanted to mention, and John, if you've played any of these or had experiences, I'd love to hear them. Of course, everyone always knows the Carter 8 pieces for timpani, and it seems like the next piece on the sort of graduate list is Toshi Ichinagi's Rhythm Gradation. But then a few less known pieces I wanted to mention. And John, I know one of your students, Diana Loomer, recorded John Sothis' Planet Damnation.
Right, yeah.
And then also I had two others to mention. One probably no one's heard of. It's by Yo Goto called Dirges. It's 4 movements. I think it's a very good sort of undergraduate recital piece. I have a student right now playing it. And then this is not strictly timpani, but as a Jean Pichet, I think is how you pronounce it, Steal the Thunder, is mostly for timpani with some opera gongs and some other kind of percussion instruments in there.
Yeah, I remember purchasing that Steal the Thunder work, and I have it somewhere in my library, and I may have had someone work on it a while ago.
It's definitely one of those pieces that ends up on your pieces to-do list, but it's hard to get to.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's there are some really cool pieces out there, and I do remember working with Diana. She's a fabulous musician, and at that particular point in time, she just recognized that she had a real talent for pedaling melodic passages on the drums. And so it was the perfect matchup. And in fact, the video I think that she uses on YouTube is a video she did in one of our practice rooms. And I believe it was recorded by Evan Chapman, I believe. So that's pretty cool, just the history of how that video came to be. But yeah, Steal the Thunder, my God. And there are a handful of other ones too. And I remember Stanley Leonard at one point shared with me a recording of a concerto, and I'll have to, if I remember the composer at some point, I'll just shout it out. But it had so much pedaling in there. The first time I heard it, I simply got worried. I just thought, my God, that would be a lot of work to pedal all that stuff. But Stanley Leonard, also a great timpani player who had that ability to just play melodically. Yeah, there are some really cool pieces. It's also interesting you mentioned the Carter, because for a number of reasons, I think we still can't overlook the Carter, even though it's become, the March is kind of the equivalent to me of like the New World Symphony of Dvorak. It's a piece that's played all the time to the point where if you really start thinking about it, it's like, oh my God, I don't ever want to hear or play that piece again. But the interesting thing about the Carter solos is I found that there are really interesting little musical nuggets in each of those solos. And so like with the March, there are some dynamic clues that allow you to play the piece maybe a little bit differently than Carter probably intended. But my take has always been, if you're a soloist and you're playing the piece, part of your job also is to give your ideas, your musical ideas, just like you would if you were playing Bach on a keyboard instrument. No one plays Bach the way it's printed. There's always going to be some time here and there, some phrasing. And so I adopted that mindset a while back for the Carters. And then I found I really actually enjoyed playing them. And the students that I have worked, when we've worked on Carter pieces, I feel like, yeah, it's kind of a cool adventure, just these tiny little things that you can find when you're working on those pieces. But again, let's hope that, more people who are listening to this podcast who are composers, it would be great if we had more repertoire for the instrument. Absolutely.
I was just going to chime in really quickly. It was many episodes ago. I can't remember even when we talked about it, but I remember Casey and I in particular were saying with the Carter pieces, I don't mind hearing them as long as they're played well. It's
Right.
a good piece of music played well has staying value. It's when every junior recital has a sort of mediocre march on it, and it's like, well, maybe something different.
Yeah, no, it's really tricky, and of course, there's all sorts of instructions, and so that can already detour a lot of players. I really like, Stuart Mars, who's a IU alum. At some point a while back, had that DVD project with the Carter pieces. Now I think he's put that all up online, and that's a really great go-to for anyone who's either feels like they have to prepare, because sometimes the Carter March actually might appear at an audition somewhere, so there's no choice. If you have to prepare it, you have to prepare it. But what's interesting is when you start to see other people play the pieces with all the instructions and everything, you quickly realize, well, okay, these are just things that I have to deal with. But when you see the piece being played, if it is being played well, most of the students that start working on that really enjoy working on those pieces. But you're exactly right; it has to be done well. It really does. Otherwise, it can be a miniature nightmare.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to hear you say that about the Carter, because I think they're important in the repertoire too, even though sometimes we hear them just too often and not great renditions. One other piece I wanted to mention that I got to do recently was the Colgrass Timpani Concertino. Is anyone familiar with that piece?
Yeah, and is that a piece with percussion ensemble accompaniment? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
It's brass ensemble. I think it's
Brass.
8 brass players.
Right. It's that one. That's right. Because I always kind of pair that piece when I'm thinking about something to play with brass, or the Peter Tanner piece for timpani and brass, which is one of my favorites actually. But I have, the Colgrass, that's another one, kind of like Steal the Thunder, although I know I've actually looked at parts of the Colgrass. I've actually, played through a little bit of that. So that's one of your favorites, Carly?
Well, that's when I was asked to do it here at FIU last year with the wind ensemble. So it was cool. That was actually my first timpani concerto with an ensemble performance.
Wow.
It was a fun piece.
Yeah, and brass always seems to work well. I mean, obviously, you're never gonna, they're never gonna cover you up, or maybe they, right? I mean, but if you play really loud, chances are the balance and issues that could be with some other instrumentation might not be as crazy.
Has anyone has anyone on this call ever heard of that Bartok Sonata, something like that?
Yeah. It's funny. A couple summers ago at IU, I think I did the Bartok twice within the span of 3 or 4 months. There were different summer events happening at the school, and I had a really great. I mean, that's when I teach that piece or coach that piece, the first thing I tell the performers, especially with the first movement, is you're never going to have a perfect performance, so don't worry about playing it. There are, it's such a long movement, and there are literally 5 or 6 transition spots that can be so tricky, and so it's almost better to take the heat off and just go, you know what, just do your best. Although I did, I had a performance not too long ago where it was near perfect, right? But one of my favorite pieces to play, absolutely. And it's sometimes in the last couple times I've chosen to play it a little differently, or we might trade off some of the parts, some of the tam notes, whatever, to make it easier for the other player to get to something else. And my music, it has got big notations and like squared off. We're saying turn so-and-so snares off now, it's
right.
Like which can be kind of fun, or if someone forgets to do something, then you're stuck, but actually I'm going to be playing that again in July, because I'm going to be over at the Swanee Music Festival, and I think part of the chamber performance that we'll do that week I'm there.
Oh, great.
We'll include the Bartok.
That piece taught me just how loud good pianists can play.
Oh, yeah.
I thought, you're going to have to be so sensitive all the time. No, sometimes I could really... Last time I did the timpani part, I could really wail, I was really amazed.
Yeah.
I was Carly's snare assistant for the Bartok.
Yep.
Also
a few years ago.
It's funny because in the old days, when I went to school at IU, and I remember seeing George Gaber perform the Bartok, and he played on Ludwig professional timpani without any gauges, and I still don't know how he played everything perfectly in tune. I have no idea how he's able to do that.
That's crazy.
It just stood out to me as this unbelievable performance of the piece. And the pianists back then also were just, it looked like they were just in their own living room, just kind of playing. And of course, this is a work where the pianists need probably 4 or 5 months of prep, right? Rehearsing.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had the percussionists in. And in one case, when we did it here one summer, I think we did it on 2 rehearsals and a sound check. And that can make for some really exciting performances when that happens. If you really know the piece, and obviously the tricky part for the percussionists, obviously, is the percussionists need to know those piano parts really well. Something as simple as placing a downbeat, if you don't know what the pianists have, you're really in trouble, right? So there's that aspect to it. And over the years, man, every time I get a chance to either hear it or play it, I'm always amazed at the amount of work and coordination that is needed in the pianos. Oh my God.
Yeah. It's tough. It was cool talking about this piece. Mr. Tafoya, you were the timpanist the very first time I ever heard the piece, I think at University of Maryland, one of the summer workshops.
Yeah, and probably with John Kilkenny, and it was probably one of the pianists, I believe, will be the same person at Sewanee, and I'm embarrassed to not remember this person's name, but they know the piano parts so well that in rehearsal, as they're playing, they're talking to you. Like, John, when you just played that crescendo, maybe a little, and I'm just sitting there going, you have to be kidding me. They just know the piece so well. But yes, I do remember that quite a long time ago there at Maryland. Yeah.
They're just showing off at that point, right? Like, do they really care about your crescendo? They're just.
I can barely coordinate 2 things. I just can't even imagine how they could do that. But it's really inspiring, of course, when you're with musicians who, you think you've done all of your homework and everything, and then you're working with other people, obviously, that are doing it times 200. And then, so it's very humbling. You just sit there and go, wow, I'm just so lucky I get to play with these great players and enjoy it,
For me, the Bartok is always a dangerous topic to get on because I could go on for an hour about it. But I had 2 things. One I wanted to add and one question for John. One is if you want to hear a phenomenal recording, I can't remember how it's built or whatever, but it's 2 of the guys from Amadinda playing with Hungarian pianists. And Svet always recommended that recording, and it is like it sounds like a studio recording. Then there's applause at the end. I mean, it's a live recording that's perfect. And the tempos can be brisk. The mark tempos
absolutely. And I've had performances where right before you walk out on stage, the pianist will say that, they'll basically say, okay, let's just decide we'll take it a little slower, just to safeguard, because it can quickly take off. And if that happens, you just have to hold on. You have to do your best.
And then the question I wanted to ask John, we mentioned there's, especially the first movement, there's a lot of like, I'll flip your snares off here, you flip my snares off, that sort of stuff. In the third movement, there's that moment where the timpanist has to play crash cymbals very briefly and then immediately go to timpani. And when Carly and I did it, we did the trick where you mount a small pair of crash cymbals on a hi-hat stand and you just activate the stand with your hand. You don't use the pedal. But I was wondering, are you a man enough to play it with real crash cymbals? Or
well,
wow.
Question that way. I don't know, Carly, you remember?
I was not. So.
I'm guessing even back at Maryland, I'm pretty sure I probably used hi-hats for that. That's what I think I did. I do remember a long time ago playing it with, and I'm using probably 15-inch cymbals and having a holder, a crash cymbal box or something really close. And then obviously you have to have your mallets set on the middle drums. It's E natural and B natural, right? You have that tugga, right? That comes right away. And so obviously if the mallets are placed on the drums and ready to go, you can kind of make it. But the older I get, I found if I can find a pair of cymbals that match really well with the percussionist cymbals, I simply put them on hi-hats, and it's so much easier to deal with, right?
Great story. He used to play it with John Haas way back when, and he said that he would, I guess John Haas would play the cymbals, then throw them into Mersch's hands. Right. And he said, we never dropped them. Then there was always a pause, and he said, in performance.
It could be, it could be a little dangerous, but it also could be really cool to see that, visually. That could be
a little too dangerous for me, yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing, with snares on, snares off, and this is something that, again, I remember this, but I've never really seen this done outside of my school, where you're getting all the sympathetic vibrations on the snares, right? And so in the old days, meaning in the early 80s, I remember playing some piece, probably with the IU Percussion Ensemble or something, and George Gaber said, oh, well, we're hearing a lot of the sounds of the snares, so put a skirt on the drum. And we were all looking like, what are you talking about? And what he actually meant was to get a piece of really thick cloth and wrap the shell of the snare drum, and then the length of that material had to go all the way to the floor. So it kind of looks like a skirt, right? And so I've actually done that with the Bartok, and an interesting thing that happens is once you start to skirt the drum, the pitch of the drum lowers because you're obviously kind of creating another shell for the instrument. So you can use like a piccolo snare drum and tune it fairly tight, wrap this we've just got a special black skirt for this thing and do it, and sometimes that takes away a lot of the the reverb or whatever, the ambient sound or whatever word I'm looking for, the resonance of the snares. It's just a way to cut that sound out. But I've never seen anyone else do that.
We built a little wall. Eric Genevin and I built a little wall between us, and it got a lot of it out of there. Yeah, and I've heard of the skirt tactic, but yeah, we were happy enough with. Because it was really fun to coordinate. Like I would reach over and turn them off. It's just like the teamwork. And I was actually going to ask, how long would you let a pair of students? I guess it would depend on how much time you have, but how long would you let them fiddle around before you just tell them, hey, here's how you do this. You're going to take it.
I usually don't give much information out at first.
Right. Okay.
It's like, yeah, try it out. If they get to a point, and if it's, if the concert's quickly approaching, then sure, I will chime in and help out. But, I think learning new pieces, whether it's something you're learning for a lesson or learning, the idea of exploring a piece for the first time is still the one thing I still really enjoy, and then listening to recordings, trying to figure out, how did they get the snares on and off for the Bartok? How the heck do they do that? And then trying to figure it out. Obviously nowadays, I could put a post somewhere on social media and ask the question, but that kind of takes the fun out of that whole exercise, and when my students do that, every once in a while, at least 2 or 3 times a year, student will come in with some awesome way to handle it that I hadn't thought of, and I just go, man, that's awesome. I'm going to steal that the next time I play this piece or whatever. It's that exploration. I think that's really still so exciting, but unfortunately with information at our fingertips, sometimes it doesn't happen that way.
Well, that was actually one question I had for you, Mr. Tafoya, is with so much information so readily available, whether you're in the Facebook groups or just let me check on YouTube and see what 5 different orchestras did in this same spot. I was thinking about your PASIC clinic and how it was all about creative problem solving and things that obviously you came up on your own to just solve these technical or musical challenges that come up. So I was going to ask, what do you do to make sure that your students are still still learning music that way and still engaged in problem solving.
I know. I mean, in the, before social media and before the internet, I mean, we had access to recordings. It just took a little bit longer to get them, or to get them out of the library or whatever, and to do that. And I would certainly listen to recordings of anything I was going to play. I mean, my rules for sure is, I'm not going to set in a first rehearsal without knowing the piece. I mean, I'm not going to do that ever. I'm going to make sure I'm really prepared and know what's coming up. But you're right. I mean, we have, and Casey, you'll get a kick out of this one actually, because several years ago, I had a student come in and they were all excited about one of your latest pieces. I can't remember what piece it was, but it was on YouTube, and they were so excited to show it to me, and we checked it out online and everything. And I said, yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome performance and an awesome video. I said, but the video I'd like to see his first 8 hours of work on the piece.
Good call.
That's what I would like to see, because again, just like with all social media, it's always kind of the result or the big thumbs up moment.
Yeah.
Right. But the process. And so my only fear is that eventually people don't enjoy that process. And sometimes it can be a long one, but man, it's so worth it to go through that. And I don't know, it's, not to sound an old curmudgeon, but it seems like a lot of younger players, and they'll get really frustrated if they can't learn a piece within a few days or something. And there's, and there's no, there's no reason for them to do that and go through that process so quickly. But yeah, I was just, as I saw you, I was thinking of that student who came in because they were so excited, and rightly so. I'm like, yeah, I mean, we're seeing on YouTube, we're seeing just everything as it's ready to go. It's all polished and ready to go. So, sometimes what I'll do with students when we're talking about, especially if they're getting ready for auditions and they're starting to record, right? And I start talking to them about the actual action of listening while, listening to your recording, but actively listening to your playback. And so they'll go, well, I'm just listening to it, right? And I'm sitting there going, well, not exactly, because what you really want to do, let's say you're recording some xylophone excerpts, or whatever, before you play Porgy and Bess, your recording of Porgy and Bess, you really should have a great idea in terms of how you want that to sound, what the spirit should be, how much the accents are going to come out, the energy, right? So all that is something that you are setting up as what you're hoping to hear. The moment you press play, then you're immediately comparing, right, your internal idea of what you'd like, how you'd like the piece to sound, and your own rendition at that given point in time. I still do that when I'm listening to new pieces. So if I have a new ensemble score, or, we had Adam Silverman wrote a new piece for us for our show we did in November. And even though there was a MIDI or a electronic version of the piece, I didn't listen to that right away, obviously. Look at the score, trying to get an idea of how I think these sections should sound. And then at some point, we have the technology, definitely listen to the recording. But then it's really cool, because then all of a sudden I'm going, oh man, that's not how I heard that. And then do I like my version, or do I need to think about the other version? But that's such a great and critical thing. And I think just with my own experience as a player, you go from the physical act of playing and how great that can feel at times, but then there's also removing yourself from that and really, really listening. And for me, that took me a really long time to get accustomed to, and to feel like my ears were actually kind of becoming that microphone, So I think technology is great, and I think we definitely have to use it. I love the idea of using, drum tracks instead of metronomes. Use that when it really works and helps, absolutely. But to do it right away and miss out on the fun of exploring it, I think is, that's the scenario I advocate a little more. Just, it's okay. There's no rush unless are you playing this tomorrow night? There's probably some time,
right.
Enjoy that process a bit.
Yeah. To rob them of the discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have the luxury to, yeah, I completely agree. And sometimes I think my students get frustrated with me because they just want me to tell them right away.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you learn so much by the journey, like if you just skip the journey, you don't learn the 20 other things that you bump into along the way. And actually, I find technology is very much that way. You're trying to figure out how to cross staff between treble and bass clef on finale or Sibelius, and you have no idea how to do it. You're going to learn so many things in the hour it's going to take you to figure that out.
Exactly.
And that's just, that's how I learned. Really mastered that software. Like, I'm like very competent in that software now because I just tooled around for so long. And thanks so much for the kind words you said a few minutes ago about the piece and that whole bit about social media. It's interesting how, and I've had to have tough talk with one particular student who was saying, "Oh, I'm just not like putting out enough. I'm not getting enough out there, and the quality needs to be better. And look at what everyone's doing." And you say, "Yeah, but if you look at just one of those individuals, like they're putting out one, great recording every 8 months or something. It's like it's very slow if you look at the amount of individual basis. If you look at your whole, news feed on Facebook, yeah, it's going to seem like everyone in the world is just amazing, and you can't keep up."
I know, and it takes time, and everyone is probably their own worst critic, right? And they're going to think twice and then some before they actually upload something, and so there's that also. Yeah.
Interesting. Ben, did you have one more thing about snare drums and Bartok?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was going to say, except for Brad Meyer, who has like 1 million YouTube recordings, they're all good. But yeah, with the Bartok, I was going to mention, this is going way back in the conversation, but we're talking about flipping the snares on and off. One of the most interesting solutions I've seen is I saw Chicago Symphony do the concerto version of the Bartok Sonata. And Cynthia Ye had somehow, and someone told me how she did this and it still didn't make sense, she had a hi-hat stand rigged up to her snare mechanism.
Yeah.
You can actually like push, I think you just like push the snares on with a hi-hat or something. But
the throw off.
Well, yeah, and I'm surprised that like Pearl hasn't released a little attachment you can put on one of those Philharmonic throw-offs. Seems like it would sell quite a few copies.
It's so funny you mentioned that because and Carly worked with Tony Ames also. Tony Ames was the principal percussionist with National for quite a long time and retired, my gosh, probably 8 or 9 years ago, right? And he is known for crafting various things that would help him in playing things that were really tricky. And so for some reason we had a rehearsal and we were doing the Gershwin Piano Concerto in F, and it begins with a timpani solo. And I don't even know why this was the case, but for whatever reasons, Tony was playing snare drum and he was situated right next to me. And so we start the rehearsal and the timpani part, bum, 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 right? And then there's crash cymbal, bass drum, snare drum roll. Well, with his snare drum right next to my drums, that opening was like buzz, 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 right?
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, Tony went into a string of obscenities and just saying, "John, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna fix it." And then during the course of the rehearsal, he had the stage crew kind of coming back and forth. They come in with the hi-hat stand. They came in with a wood.
Oh my God.
So during the course of this rehearsal, they rigged up something that I bet is really similar to what you're describing, Ben, because basically it was like a wooden chassis that held the snares, and then it was connected to the hi-hat stand. And so, yeah, when you press the pedal down, the snares are off, and you let go of the pedal, and all of a sudden the snares are back on the drum. So, yeah, that's interesting you mentioned it, but I immediately could just remember that situation playing the Gershwin. But within the day, he had it completely solved. And it was just amazing. I mean, he did so many things like that.
Well, I don't think I knew about that one, but I remember what Tony had rigged up to muffle the bass drum at the end of Rite of Spring. It was like with a kick pedal, and I don't remember what was attached to the kick pedal, but it was something like play the last note and then.
Right. I'm pretty sure he probably rigged a pedal so that however it was set up, there was probably some large dampening device or something on the other side of the head. I could probably recall more than a dozen different stories from acting. And his claim to fame was, he could kind of conjure up anything with gaffer's tape. That was his. He could just kind of make anything. But it was really inspiring, and actually, it was my time with him that got me thinking a little more about playing things a little bit outside of the realm of things that might be normal, but challenging. So, Carly, you were mentioning my session at PASIC, and it's funny. My first book is called The Survival Guide, right? And that sounds pretty maybe a little bit too dramatic, right? But the issue always is going to be, and when you're the timpani player in an orchestra, and that conductor wants a faster tempo or they want something, you have to be able to make that change within about 10 seconds. And if you can't do that time after time, it's not going to be a good tenure, I don't think, right? The idea is to be ready. And so actually seeing Tony do some of those things got me thinking more about some of the ideas that I presented in the session. Actually, what do you do if it's too fast, or you're playing something so soft and they still want you to play something softer? How do you handle all that stuff? And sure, someone could say, well, that's very gimmicky. Well, it's okay if that's what I need in order to survive, in quotations, right? Whatever the request might be, then I can sleep perfectly well at night with that. It's okay.
Yeah, gosh, so many good Tony stories come to mind. But Ben, I think you have something about the sad news we heard recently about Dave Samuels.
Yeah, so changing gears quite a bit here. We try to cover some of the news in the percussion world, and anyone that's on social media has probably seen that the very famous jazz vibraphonist / marimbist Dave Samuels has passed away. So I figured I'd give a tiny little bit of biographical information about Dave Samuels here. He was born in Waukegan, Illinois on October 9th, 1948, and he just passed away on April 22nd, 2019 of, it sounds like, some sort of long-term illness that was going on. He started playing drums and piano around the age of 6, and he said that growing up near Chicago, he was exposed to many great jazz musicians. His high school had a jazz club where they invited artists to come and visit, and one of the artists that they actually got to come visit them was the very famous jazz saxophonist Cannonball Adderley, which I thought was pretty remarkable that a high school could get him out. So he studied vibes and marimba at Boston University, and he continued at Berklee College of Music, studying with the very famous, of course, jazz vibraphonist Gary Burton. He moved to New York City in 1974, where he met and began playing with David Friedman, eventually forming the Double Image duo, which was inducted into the Percussive Arts Society Hall of Fame. Around this time, also in the late 1970s, he started recording with Spyro Gyra, which is like a sort of contemporary jazz fusion group. And by 1984, he was a full member of this group. They were nominated with him in the lineup for 5 Grammys, and they were nominated for Top Contemporary Jazz Artist, they were named the Top Contemporary Jazz Artist and Top Contemporary Jazz Group of the 1980s by Billboard magazine. He also founded a group called the Caribbean Jazz Project in 1995 with Paquito de Rivera and Andy Narell, and that group had several different lineups, but the consistent member was Dave Samuels. He recorded with Frank Zappa, Pat Metheny, and Bobby McFerrin, among others. One of my favorite recordings of Dave Samuels is actually with Keiko Abe. I'm blanking on the name of the album right now. I think it's Conversations and something or another. He taught at Berklee College of Music, New England Conservatory, New York University, and Manhattan School of Music. He published several books, instructional videos, and pieces of music. He was an innovator for electronic percussion, particularly on the mallet cat electronic instrument that many of us are familiar with. He won a Grammy for Best Latin Jazz Album in 2002 for an album called The Gathering with the aforementioned Caribbean Jazz Project. And he was a speaker for the program called To Whom I May Concern, which is an educational tool for individuals and families of those diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And Dave Samuels was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, early onset Alzheimer's in 2013. In the Percussive Arts Society Hall of Fame article, they had quotes from several different very famous percussionists. One of the best ones I thought was from Gordon Stout, who said that Dave Samuels was an innovative, superb musician, mallet artist, composer, and teacher. And he, of course, played in this double image duo with Dave Friedman for, I think, somewhere around 40 years, something like that. And in their induction to the Hall of Fame, Dave Friedman said, "We're not married. That's why we get along so great." Which I love. So, yeah, I was fortunate to see double image play at PASIC maybe about 10 years ago, 2007 or something like that. Yeah, Casey's got the album there. And I actually got Dave Samuels to autograph a CD. So, yeah, really, really phenomenal jazz mallet player.
Wow, thanks, Ben. Geez, I remember seeing the Caribbean Jazz Project at Utah State University when I was, I don't know, very young, 14 or somewhere between, 12 and 16, something like that, and just jaw on the floor the whole time watching Dave, watching all of them. I mean, but Dave is I just couldn't believe tune after tune after tune. And they played something like a 3-hour show, and it was just that good. Everything was just so good. And so I mean, Dave Samuels, his name really rang out very early to me as a kid, like very, very important. And I remember I'm talking a little out of turn here because I never knew Dave, and Dave certainly didn't know me at all. But I remember seeing him on the streets in Boston as he was, leaving or coming from Berkeley, and I was going back and forth on that Mass Avenue there. Boston Conservatory is connected to Berkeley there. And or seeing him at PASIC or performing or just in the hall, he just always had this just amazing confidence. And because he's just that amazing, he wore his ability on his face to me. And again, I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know the guy, but seeing him a few PASICs ago with the Alzheimer's, it's just, it breaks your heart a little bit. You can just see the look of the change, and he in one of his obituaries online, it does say, or one of the postings that borrows from his obituary, I suppose, they do say, if you want to donate to the Alzheimer's Association, that's what the family is requesting, or to the Berklee College of Music Scholarship Fund.
Yeah, and in that induction speech with double image for the PAS Hall of Fame, Dave Friedman kind of leads, and you can, I think, kind of see that Dave Samuels is a little subdued, I guess you could say. But I loved reading the memories of his humor. It seems like he had a really good sense of humor, as well as Dave Friedman, obviously, who we're very close. Dave posted like this wonderful Facebook post with just like the happiest looking pictures of the last time they played together, and one of their last meals together. Is very, very sweet.
Well, one thing in his obituary from Chicago Tribune, it says, Grammy-winning percussionist and internationally known jazz musician educator Dave Samuels passed away peacefully in Bridgeport, Connecticut on Monday, April 22nd, after a 7-year battle with early onset Alzheimer's. He was 70 years old. Samuels had halted his performances in 2013 following his diagnosis. He has provided that his brain be donated to Yale University for further research on Alzheimer's. Thought that was really cool.
I got to know David Friedman fairly well, but unfortunately I never met Dave Samuels. But it's interesting because I do remember in the 80s, it would have been the early 80s, and Spyro Gyro was a big hit, and that kind of music, instrumental music, was on the top 40. And I remember the song Morning Dance came out, and it had Steel Pan in it, and then in the middle there was this unbelievably cool marimba solo. And I remember in high school learning every single note of that solo, because it was just so amazing, so thought out and right. So yeah, and then I also remember double image performances at PASIC as well. I mean, just extraordinary musician.
I was going to say, I think, Casey, my experience with Dave Samuels in Boston was similar to yours. I never worked with him. I don't even think we ever met in person, but I was doing some reading up on him this weekend. And one of the cool things I read, that he had a quote that he said, it's not so much about becoming a professional musician when you're studying music, but rather being a professional human which I thought is such a cool holistic approach to the arts and music and what we do. And then also, he would talk about how music is about communicating with people and connecting with people, and we're not just performers, but also, he advocated that musicians should compose and should improvise and should be involved with all the arts. So it's just such a cool, like, holistic approach to what we do. It's nice to hear about.
Yeah. I remember watching other students, Dave Samuel's assignments at Boston Conservatory. And again, it's a little confusing. He taught at Berkeley. Boston Conservatory was down the street, but there was something of this like arts exchange program. So I took a few classes at Berkeley. People could take a few, and they would often take Dave Samuel's improv class, and they were always improving on Bach. He'd have them learn this Bach and then improv and figure out what the chord changes would be. And I guess through that, he could demonstrate like style distinction and how it can develop and how you can improvise classically. And then if you just do this and that, you're improvising in jazz, and it's the same, and you can diagnose the same chord structures and all these things. Just really, really interesting.
Yeah, on that note, I was going to mention, I'm finding this 1 second. Hold on.
No dead air, Ben.
It's fine. All right, here.
This is where the editing comes in, right?
I edit. I will edit.
All right, here we go. And back in. On that note, I was going to mention that, and there's a University of Illinois Facebook group that William Mersch posted after Dave Samuels passed. He posted this article from Percussive Notes. Let's see here. This is Percussive Notes, October 2000, called Achieving Music Literacy by Dave Samuels. And it was sort of like a basic preview, but it talks about exactly what Casey's talking about with learning Bach and identifying the chords. And he uses the example of, let's see here, it is Bach, Sarabande from Partita number 1 for unaccompanied violin by J.S. Bach. And the jazz tune is All the Things You Are by Oscar Hammerstein, has the same chord progression. So.
Oh, cool. Well, I love that. I love that approach, because I don't know if you've ever bumped into that young person that's just like, oh, classical or jazz, or like if you're into this one, then you must hate this other one, and you just kind of like, ugh, shut up. It's not that's not how it is anyway. Well, Carly, should I get to a Facebook question or so?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's start with someone, Paul Millette. Thanks so much. Paul often asks really, really great questions. And Paul asks, as a student, were there any particular timpanists whose sound or technique you tried to emulate?
And I know Paul very well, so hopefully, Paul, you're listening, and thanks for the question. I was, I'll go backwards just a couple of steps before the answer, but basically, I was really fortunate that both my parents were in the music business, and so when I decided that music was the thing that I really wanted to pursue, I had all these really great resources, really great teaching from the get-go. I lived in St. Louis at the time, and so I would go. I had free tickets to go see St. Louis Symphony pretty much anytime I wanted to go. And so we moved to St. Louis. I think I was in the 7th or 8th grade, and I had been studying percussion starting at age, or I guess in grade 4. Yeah, 4th grade you could do. No, 4th grade you could do a string instrument, and then when I chose violin in grade 4, and then 5th grade you could choose a quote unquote band instrument. So I chose percussion, and so we moved to St. Louis, and at some point I see the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra play, and that percussion section was just amazing to me. Their artistry, it was as if every single note, everything they were doing was supremely important, and you could just pick up on that. And the timpanist was Rick Holmes, and Rick had studied with Goodman at Juilliard, and I think it was impossible to not look at him when he played. And I don't know I don't know if Jonathan Haas ever mentioned anything about that too, but there were so many of us that lived near St. Louis and caught those concerts, and it was literally like getting a lesson every time you went to the concert. You would learn something new. You'd see just some kind of a interesting approach, or why did they play it this way? But I can still see Rick's hands on the timpani, and it just looked like it was just so elegant, everything he did. And so, I was just at that age where I just was incredibly impressed by that. And at that moment, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to play just like this person. So his sound was more of a Goodman style player. What was really interesting too, and this is like one of the things, when you get older, you just start thinking about making sure you tell those people that really influenced you how they affected you. And so when I got the job here at IU in 2007, believe it or not, in the summertime, Rick Holmes had been hired to teach at IU for the summer. And so I'm flying back from DC, and as I get to the airport in Indy, I realize, or I remember, you know what? I think this is Rick's last day of teaching at IU. So before I even get home, I'm going to stop by and see him. And so he was in my office, and it sounded like he was teaching, because I heard, a lot of drums are being played, whatever. And so I kind of waited, and then I politely knocked, but he didn't open up the door. And then I started to knock really loudly, and still he didn't open up the door, which I thought was a little weird. And so, but I had a key to my own office, obviously, so I kind of let myself in. And what had happened was, now by that time I owned several different sets of instruments, different brands of timpani and what have you. And so I had 2 or 3 sets in that office. And Rick had taken the tops off of all the drums and was trying out the instruments, which I would have done exactly the same thing. But the look on his face when I opened up the door, right? And it was all I could do, because inside I was laughing hysterically, but I just didn't, I wanted to make sure he knew right away that it was totally cool. And I just said, Rick, I said, you can bang on any of my stuff. What do you think about these drums? And we just quickly talked about gear and what have you. And then we were just chatting, and he was talking about when he was a kid, he lived in Washington, D.C. area, and he would go see the National Symphony Orchestra play. And Fred Begun was a timpanist back then. And Rick said, man, when I saw Fred behind those big drums, that's what I knew, that's what I was going to do. And so at that moment, I couldn't believe it. I said at that moment to Rick, I said, well, Rick, when I saw you play, the moment I saw you play, I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. So I was so glad I was able to just tell him that. I don't really think he knows all the people that he affected, just by people that just never took a lesson with him, but just learned by watching him. You can ask anyone who experienced that, and they'll say exactly the same thing. But the actual sound concept idea for me originally was more Goodman-esque. Later, when I was here at IU, after George Gaber retired, Jerry Carlos from the Philadelphia Orchestra came here to teach. And that's when I really learned about, what a big full sound sounded like and how that was possible. And then kind of taking all that information and figuring out in the audition scene that was happening back then, what kind of sound was actually going to work for real. And that's where it got interesting, because I quickly found out on, in just taking auditions, that I was going to have to modify the sound that I wanted to use. A lot of the auditions back then were for smaller orchestras. And so those people with a smaller sound, more compact sound, were getting work. And I wanted to work, so I really experimented with lots of different ways to think about sound. And every once in a while, I actually do a class, and I'm probably overdue to do one here again, where I literally have 3 different sets of timpani mallets that, you can all see them, but every mallet is related to the other set of mallets. It's really cool. It means that I have a particular numbering system, or a way to identify a mallet, that I can literally change to a different set of mallets, incorporate a completely different sound idea, but still go with the same stick that I have written on my music that I'm going to use. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of fun too, because you can physically see the difference in materials of the mallet, really heavy stick versus bamboo or something in between that. And that was just something that I had to do again to survive. There's the word again. But to get to a point where I could have a job offer and I could actually, play as a professional musician.
Thanks so much for answering that in that way and mentioning St. Louis, because our buddy Matt Henry asked also on Facebook, actually while we were recording, the question came in, but he said, with your heart still residing, at least some of your heart still residing in St. Louis, were you influenced by the SLSO percussion section? And he mentions, of course, Rick Holmes. So thanks. You've answered Matt's question as well.
Musicians there. And the first time I got a chance to play with St. Louis, that again, it just was a huge impression, made a huge impression on me. St. Louis, you're kind of in the heart of the Midwest. And, but my first experience playing with that orchestra was like, here are these really phenomenal players, and none of them seemed to have any kind of air about them. They just played. They played really well. And they had this, this idea in terms of what their integrity level was going to be, no matter who was on the podium. And you could just feel it, And I'm so glad that was my first experience with a professional group, because I immediately thought, this makes sense to me. Since then, sure, you can encounter people that don't have that kind of way of being a professional, but it made such an impression on me, and I just thought, yeah, I want to be one of those players. I just want to simply play, and I don't have to be this way or the other way. I can just be a nice person that plays, So yes, I do have some really great memories of St. Louis. Unfortunately, Rick passed away of cancer, and but again, I was just so happy that I had that moment to talk to him and to tell him that he was really that he was the reason I was doing what I was doing. I was able to make it to his memorial service, and I know everyone there was really upset. I was upset too, but I was just so grateful that I had that opportunity to talk with him.
Oh, very nice. You'll have to explain this one. Matt Henry also asked, do you yearn for toasted ravioli and Budweiser whilst living in Bloomington? I don't know what that means.
We have so many students that audition for us every year, and so when you're with an orchestra that tours a lot, one of my non-music hobbies is kind of keeping track of really nice restaurants in various areas all over the United States. It's kind of my it's not a talent, it's just something I enjoy kind of trying to remember. And so if a student comes in from St. Louis, I'm going to ask them about, there's a restaurant there called the Pasta House Company, or the Pasta House, and they make, as an appetizer, toasted ravioli that I can, as I'm describing it, I can taste it right now. And then they would make these salads with a house dressing that was just unbelievably great. And so certainly if a student is from St. Louis area and they're auditioning, and if we usually interview everyone too, and I may ask a question that has nothing to do with music, and I may just say, hey, do you like the toasted ravioli? And
and then they freak out, I'm sure.
Whoa, what do you mean? Right?
What's the answer to that?
But yeah, that's one fun thing, I guess, about touring and traveling is, when you find something really cool. About a year ago, I was doing a thing at a day of percussion in Fresno, California, and there was a picnic going on, and they had, you could either have hot dog or tri-tip. And I had no idea what tri-tip was.
I just had tri-tip for the first time in California like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
And wasn't it awesome?
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there going, what is this? And it had been marinating in some kind of really great sauce, whatever. And so, when you find something like that, you start to obsess over, okay, why haven't I heard about this before? and where can I get it in Bloomington, Indiana? So I'm literally Googling tri-tip, Bloomington, and lo and behold, there's a place where you can get it here as well.
Well, we do have a question from our buddy Brian Bloom, who's also an IU graduate, and he says, "What's the worst thing about working with Kevin Bobo?"
I don't know if there's a worse thing. I'm sure there are a lot of things they could say to me. I chair the department, so I'm the one that has to bug a faculty member to get something, information or what have you. But I have to say, I mean, the one nice thing about our setup here at IU is, I'm one of several faculty here. What's really nice is that my colleagues have a really good, they have a really great ability to kind of see me, and they can tell kind of when I'm overloaded or whatever, and they'll say, well, what can we do? I remember being out of town somewhere and calling up Kevin Bobo for a favor, and he just, without hesitation, he was like, what can I do? What can I do? And man, so when you have colleagues like that, it doesn't even seem like you're working,
Well, that was actually a Casey question, because I just got that vibe when I visited. I mean, you guys just get along so well, and there's such a great sense of humor. Brian had a real question, which is,
Casey,
can you talk about?
I had a quick question, Casey. Could you tell us about your relationship working with the other percussion person at JMU?
Wait, what?
Could you tell us about your relationship working with the other percussion person at JMU?
Oh, Laurel? I get it. I don't know why that took me a minute. Well, I mean, that's good. Thanks, Ben. Well, Brian Bloom had a real question, which was, can you talk about your training as a Can you talk about how your training as a violinist shaped you as a percussionist?
Yeah. Like I said, my parents were very knowledgeable in the business, and so I started playing violin in the 4th grade. I continued playing, and I was always studying with someone in wherever we were staying. I lived in Minnesota before St. Louis, so I was studying with someone in the Minnesota orchestra. And then we moved to St. Louis, and I had my violin teacher was a member of the St. Louis Symphony. And when it came time to decide what I was going to do as a music performance major, it literally was, well, what instrument will that be? And my parents waged a pretty good case, right? They said, well, look at the orchestra, and how many violinists do you see there, and how many percussionists do you see? And I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, except I enjoyed playing violin. I did both in high school. And for whatever reasons back then, I chose, that violin was going to be the thing. And the one thing that I think is so awesome about violin, viola, the instrument is connected to you, and you can feel everything that's going on. And obviously the sustain that you can get with the use of the bow is something I still think about when I play rolls on the timpani. I don't ever want my rolls to sound like a roll. I don't think of it as a roll. It's a sustain. And so I will literally try to work on that sound in that way. So certainly that's one pretty basic example. Boy, I mean, I can't imagine being a timpani player and having the success that I've had without having had that experience on violin, and just being aware of what string players have to deal with in the orchestra. I mean, a timpani player, you're kind of that great moderator in the ensemble, and you have to know how the groups are how they're gonna react, and everyone's got a different job on the group. So just by now having knowledge of what the string players have to deal with is certainly really helpful. At some point after I'd been here at IU, I simply just made the change over to percussion. It was kind of an interesting sequence of events that led to that. But I think really any kind of other instrument experience that you can have as a percussionist, certainly you don't have to do that, but I think it can really help. I can only imagine if, if you're a woodwind player, brass player, the idea of taking the breath and sustaining the sound that way through a column of air, similar in terms of how strings, have a long sound as well. That would be a really great comparison technically in terms of what we have to do and other things that you can think about when you're playing, a percussion instrument. So, I don't think I would change anything in that way. Probably what's really funny, because I think I showed this to someone at PASIC, was I actually played in the violin section with the Canton Symphony Orchestra in Ohio. And back then, and I have the program to prove it somewhere, we played Mahler 5. The timpanist in Canton at that time was Tim Adams, and Tom Freer was in the percussion section. And then my name's under the first violin section or second violin section. So I should have to find that program.
Well, something you were talking about reminded me of another musician I'd like to mention, and I'm going to kind of dovetail this into a Facebook question. So you're talking about the sort of the way that non-percussion instruments can make percussionists think outside of the box. And when I think of percussionists with that topic, I always think of Nancy Zeltzman, who of course played in the marimba duo for so many years, and she always talks about how the playing with a violinist on a regular basis, I mean, for hours on end every single week, really influenced her ability to create different colors on the marimba. And it sounds like your violin experience was similar to that. Another thing that I heard Carly in particular talk about with Nancy Zeltzman was Nancy said, it's basically, you're probably not going to, as a musician, finish school and immediately have a career out in front of you and made for you. So it's important to retain your artistry while also, effectively being able to make a living. And I know Nancy's claim to fame with that is that she worked at a health food store for a while when she was getting started up. And I heard Carly talk about that on many occasions. So we have a Facebook question from Ted Jackson that I'd kind of like to spin that topic into. Ted says, how has your career path influenced you as a musician, moving from a full-time orchestra member to a full-time faculty member, teaching at universities throughout your career, etc.? And then also I was going to ask alongside that, do you have any advice for budding young professional musicians with the sort of Nancy Zeltzman thing in mind?
Yeah, well, I think nowadays, to go in reverse order, I think nowadays percussionists, all musicians, I think, really have to have a wider skill set, and which should also include the ability to use electronics and recording devices and computers, and I just think, and the first person I think of with that is Evan Chapman. Here's a guy who loved just filming things, and he did it so well that now he's doing as a career what he just simply had a passion for, right? And that's the idealistic cliche answer, right? You have to do what you really want to do. I saw somewhere I think it was at a TED Talk or something, someone was saying if you want to work doing what you're passionate about, you have to work 3 times more than anyone. It's probably more than that, I think, right? But if that's all you want to do, if you have the passion for it and the drive and the commitment, it's probably going to work. It's probably going to happen. My career, I've just been very lucky, and for some reason, I've always had a teaching component along with my playing, always. I started teaching and playing in 1987, and the school was the University of Evansville, and then the 2 orchestras, it was like a consortium arrangement with University of Evansville Philharmonic, Owensboro Symphony Orchestra. And man, what a great way to learn more repertoire and then start teaching. It was really weird if you're 23 years old and you're teaching people that are just a few years younger than you. It was kind of an interesting dynamic, but I never really gave it a second thought, and I've always enjoyed teaching. I think there's something about keeping things alive in your head about your playing, and the most important thing, and the thing that I've always enjoyed about teaching, is the ability to share everything that you've experienced and to share it with someone who's really working hard and wants to do either what you want or or really anything, that has a passion for anything they want to do as a musician. And you share with them the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And the idea that, you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed, and you have to be okay with that. And I'll tell them how many auditions I took, and I only got X amount of jobs from that. You just have to learn to be okay with that. So I've always felt like, and at FIU, where Carly is right now, I mean, that was a really interesting situation. I'd been with the Florida Philharmonic for a couple of years. A lot of the teaching had already been kind of sewn up. I mean, Keith Aleo was teaching at the University of Miami, along with Fred Wickstrom. And then this school, Florida International University, kind of opened up, and I had heard that there was some kind of possible percussion opening there. I made a few calls. No one seemed to know anything about it. And I just said, well, just let me know who the head instrumental person is. And I sent him a envelope with just basic information about me, what have you. That person was Matthew McInturf, who was director of bands at FIU at the time. Little did I know that within a couple of days, he was at a band convention, and he bumps into Ray Kramer, who was the conductor here at IU. And Ray is really well known and held in really high regard. And Matthew said, yeah, we have this guy that just sent in some stuff. His name's Tafoya. And Ray looked at him and said, hire him. When you get back, hire him. So it was really interesting. So I had a great opportunity to be part of FIU, where it was really starting to grow, because that art center was brand new. And so we were able to put on some festival performances to kind of, celebrate this new building that was there. So that was just really, really exciting. Similar things were occurring later when I was at University of Maryland. The funny but true thing, and hopefully my wife Claire won't mind me saying this, but we moved to the DC area. Our children were very small at the time, and we were unpacking our boxes. We were living in Fairfax, Virginia, unpacking our boxes. And she looked at me. Now, I hadn't done anything wrong up until that point, but she looked at me and she said, you have this habit of doing extra things, and there's no reason why you need to do anything extra now. You've got this really great job. And again, I hadn't done anything wrong, and I'm just unpacking boxes. And she's like, just decide that you're not going to, or think about it before you decide to say yes to anything additional, because you don't really need to do, that kind of thing. Well, she knew me really well. And probably a week later, I got a phone call from the director of the School of Music at University of Maryland. And he's like, yeah, we have, 3 or 4 students that really have an interest in studying with you. And would you like to? And I said, yes, absolutely. So, I've always enjoyed sharing and working with students. I think that's just so, and then what I really started to get into was, when a lot of my students were starting to have success. And at one point I remember it seemed to me like I was happier for this person getting this job than I was ever happy for myself in getting a job. I just thought, my God, this is really cool. I'm helping these people, but I'm actually getting them to a point where they can contribute in the music making that they want to do. So I've just been really lucky because I was able to do both. And obviously there are musicians that would never do that. Playing is just what they need to do, and that's perfectly fine. And making the switch to full-time, really, the only thing that's not as good are the jokes. That's the only thing. So when you're in a professional orchestra, you got like 65 other people, and you'll have a couple people that just tell jokes really great on a daily basis, right? Sorry to say, I can't really get any great jokes from my students. Sorry, right? But that's really the only kind of difference, right? Because you're surrounded by musicians in the school setting; they're just younger. But I really, because the situation here at IU is just so great, and it's almost too easy in terms of what we have to do as teachers. All our students are phenomenal. So it's really a joy to come in every single day and work. And yeah, occasionally I do miss the playing. At this point now, it's totally fine if my phone doesn't ring. But I was really lucky 5 years ago, I was able to help out with Baltimore and with Detroit Symphony. So I was able to kind of get my hands dirty again and do some playing. But ultimately, like even with Detroit, I think we ended with a recording session of Appalachian Spring. And then I packed everything up, and it was sort of my last week with the orchestra. And this will be fun. My lights in my studio are going weird. But it was just so fun to be able to play and to be part of that. But then at the same time, it was also really okay to not be playing, right? It was all right to not do that, because you get to a point where you just realize, I think I've played enough notes. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, as I hear you talking about the way you've balanced different aspects of your career, and also you mentioned like percussionists today have to be really well-rounded. I think just to be marketable for teaching jobs or playing jobs. Do you have any advice for students or maybe young musicians on balancing their professional lives between different parts of the work life and also personal life?
I know.
Personal time.
But it's such an individual thing, right? I remember making a decision a long time ago, that I really just wanted to do timpani. I was doing some percussion auditions, but timpani was really what was doing it for me. And my God, I had, professional musicians that were telling me that I was making a big mistake. And, you're putting all your eggs in one basket and that kind of thing. But again, the one thing we don't know is what the future of our business is going to be like. And so for that reason, I think, the basis of how we work with our students here in terms of the undergraduate students, we want them to get a little bit of everything. And what's been interesting in that setup is that every once in a while you'll see a student who comes in and they want to do a certain area, but then after they get exposed to something else, they realize, oh my God, I really like this other thing. So I think there is a period where you do want to try a lot of different things. I used to take great delight in seeing people that I knew were going to be timpani players play in an Afro-Cuban ensemble. I love that. I mean, I can't do that, but I really just, that means if their phone rings and they're doing a job, they have a wider skill set than I would have, right? But then, there comes to a point where, how do you juggle that? How are you going to be this person that can do a lot of things well and not stand out in one particular thing? And that's literally something I think everyone knows in their gut what they probably are going to do or what they should be doing. It's really challenging, and especially now because, people wage their opinions on Facebook or whatever and tell you what to do. And it's okay to get advice, but ultimately I think, you just have to know, this is the thing, this is the only thing I want to do, and that's it, and go with it. You almost need that nowadays also, but, so it is a juggling act, and I don't really know what the actual answer is to that, because there are only so many hours in the day, to contend with all that. But, if you're a keyboard player and you really love playing the marimba, the idea of becoming a marimba soloist, right? The odds are going to be what they're going to be. If there's another area or something else that you really enjoy doing, then add that other area. I think it's okay. At some point, you might have to make that decision like I did. It's just going to be timpani and that's it. And to those people that said, well, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, I finally would say, well, but I like this basket. This is the basket I'm carrying around. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And I have to be okay with the idea of doing that and making a living and earning 20,000 or 120,000 and having the same kind of integrity for what I'm doing, regardless of that. The salary doesn't really mean anything. It's your drive, your interest in what you want to do. So I think, yeah, I wish I had a really great, terrific answer for everyone who's listening on the podcast. But just like with all the self-help books and how to succeed, I think deep down everyone knows what it is they probably really want to do. But again, if you're a freshman in college, I would definitely, if I were doing that over again, I would really want to learn how to play Afro-Cuban music. I would really want to learn more on drum set and jazz vibes. I would really, right? I might still come to the same conclusion and be a timpani player, but again, if the phone rings, I might be able to say, yeah, I can do that. I can do that gig. I can play some conga drum and I can do this and that. So having some kind of wider skill set, I think right now is going to be super, super helpful.
Wow, it's excellent. Well, we do have one more Facebook question. We're really lucky that all these questions are giant topic, open, wide questions. So I'm just going to insist that you answer this one as quick as you can, which I know maybe it's probably not a quick question at all, but I would hate to leave out a question from Will Marinelli because he's given us such good questions over the years. And it's not a quick answer at all, but it's, can you talk about how that's not it. It is this one. How has the role of timpanists in the orchestra changed over the last century?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right.
It's like a doctoral thesis or a dissertation, maybe.
I know.
Well, I'm not sure that it's really changed all that much. I think what we have now are really, just like with every instrument, really, we have musicians that play at a superior level, both technically and musically. And the one cool thing for us timpani players is that somewhere, kind of when I was playing in different orchestras and whatever, at some point there were a handful of us players that decided that we were not going to be of a particular quote unquote school of playing. So, in the 60s and 70s, you had Goodman style, and then you had the Cleveland, the Duff style of playing, right? And I knew that I was helping in kind of blurring those lines when I was hired to play with Florida Philharmonic. And I remember someone called Keith Aleo, and they said, okay, so you hired this guy. What school is he? Is he Goodman or Duff? And Keith hesitated and he said, I'm not sure. And I took that as a huge compliment, right? So the short answer is, I think, like with everything else, the playing and the level of playing, oh my God, it's really gotten to a point where technically, musically, it's certainly going to get better. It has to, right? All musicians have to get better. But what's been really nice is to see players now in terms of auditions where they hire a new timpani player somewhere. The conversation now usually does not hinge on, well, what kind of style player are they or anything that has that kind of specific description about it. It's just, no, we hired the musician that we wanted to play with, and that's so-and-so. So, yeah, Will, that's a great question. And if I have to do a quick answer, I think that's probably the best I can do.
That's great. Well, hey, I do have one quiz question for you guys this week. I know we're way over, but it really relates to what John was saying in Carly's question about balance. So this is way, way back, Ben and Carly, so I don't know if you guys will possibly remember this, but your review question is, throughout the years on the podcast, our listeners have asked many of our guests how they deal with time management and the balance. On episode 10, Lal reported on a very popular book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. The author suggests you prioritize your obligations and needs into 4 quadrants under 4 categorical labels. What are the 4 labels?
Oh, I know. I just talked with my
great.
students
You
about
do
this
know.
in student class.
I talked to students about this too.
Do you guys both remember this?
Well, it's something I've heard outside of the podcast even.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I'm blown away. I have not heard of it outside of the podcast. So I think I heard Carly's voice first, so that might be a point for Carly. We do keep score, actually.
It might be my first point. I don't know.
It might be, actually, yeah.
So the quadrants are important and urgent, important and not urgent, urgent but not important, and not important and not urgent.
Wow, A+.
Right?
Yeah, that's wow, great job. So yeah, you totally nailed it. So this was way back on episode 10 with Eric Genovan, also an IU grad and a percussionist, and our one of our comp faculty here. And something that I think this table suggests is, of course, you try to figure out where you put your time and how you can rearrange it. And that one of the quadrants we don't spend enough time in is important and not urgent. And that's the types of things like, if I got better at sight reading, I'd be able to learn hard marimba rep quicker. So I need to set 10 minutes aside every day to do that and get working on this important thing that isn't necessarily urgent. Another way of saying that is people say, oh, you have to take time to sharpen the saw every day, or whatever. So yeah, way to go, Carly. I'm so impressed with both of you, Ben and Carly. That's very impressive.
All right. Well, DMAs.
That's what it is.
Time learning how to manage your time.
That's what it is. Carly, you should wrap us up. You're the host.
Carly
All
asked,
right.
where does email fit in? Where does answering email fit into?
Gosh. Most of the time, I think urgent and not important.
Right. Yeah.
Things we have to deal with, we have to respond to, but not always the most important things on our plates.
If I could just make an appeal really quickly to all universities to stop sending any university-wide emails whatsoever unless there's like an active shooter on campus, because those are for the most part the most irrelevant. Like, I don't care if the vice assistant provost of student affairs is retiring. Like, I don't care.
I feel like there really should be an inbox limit exceeded. Just like, I mean, if it used to be you had to answer the phone to get a message and you're like on the phone all day, then phone calls wouldn't get through because you're literally like on the phone all day. You would get a busy signal. I feel like we need the equivalent of that for email. Like, sorry, you're the 80th message to this email. It didn't go through. You'll have to try again later.
Yeah, that would be. let's work on that new system. That would be great.
That would be good.
A good project. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tafoya, for talking with us today. It's been full of lots of wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much again, and congratulations on the success of this podcast series and 180. That's pretty remarkable. So,
yeah, thanks so much. Great to have you, John.
All right.
All right. Casey, I don't know. How do we do this?
Oh,
this is my first closing.
We just say, all right, thanks, everyone. See you later.
I planned out the whole opening. Okay, so here we go.
It's harder than you think, isn't it?
It really is.
There's a lot to think about. Yeah, bye, everyone.
All right, take care.